good thing is that each year, I think we get closer to positive regulation.
This is going to be a massive industry that's going to bring economic opportunity to whatever country gets regulation, quote unquote, right.
Some people hate it, and the crypto community is divided whether CBDC is good for the ecosystem or not.
This is part of the issue, right? There isn't really a global convening body of these regulators.
So everyone's trying to make that transition, and I think gaming world is going to be that big transition phase this year.
It's a very reasonable thing to do, to put some part of your investment or savings into crypto. Do your own research. Don't trust anything you read on social media.
2021 was a fascinating year when it came to the world of blockchain technologies. Now, cryptocurrencies grew in their adoption, accessibility, and interest levels. Now, the world also saw a couple of extremely interesting moves. El Salvador giving a big thumbs up for all things Bitcoin, and China throwing a massive, a proverbial wet blanket on crypto coins. You had newer implementations of the blockchain tech, and that brought the artist community into the fray and larger enterprises entering the ring as well. In a nutshell, right? It's been a fascinating year. Now, the status or the relative status of the preceding years giving way to action, and we honestly expect this action to continue. So to give us an idea on what more to expect, we have two very fascinating people plugging in today to Business Insider India. Please join me in welcoming Sheila Warren, the Deputy Head for the Center of the Fourth Industrial Revolution. That's the C4IR. She's also the Head of Data, Blockchain, and Digital Assets, and member of the Executive Committee at the World Economic Forum. Now, Sheila's work sees her working with governments and businesses across the world to accelerate the adoption of new technologies in global public interest. Thanks for joining us, Sheila.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Please welcome back Nischal Shetty. Nischal is the founder and CEO of WazirX, India's leading crypto exchange and one of the oldest proponents of cryptocurrencies in India. Welcome back, Nischal.
Hey, Ashwin. Thanks a lot for having me here.
Now, as I said, cryptocurrencies have been in the news over the past few years, and it's grown beyond just Bitcoin. Right now, we have the cryptoverse, which is trying to come out with NFTs. We have the Web 3.0 that people are talking about. The metaverse is bubbling up right now. Very quickly, Sheila, if you could tell us, what is something that is particularly exciting? What is keeping you up in the nice sense in the world of blockchain and cryptocurrencies for the coming year?
Yeah, thanks, Ashwin, for the question. I think what I'm really excited about is that we're seeing the convergence of a lot of trends that have been occurring for quite some time. So the metaverse, Web3, they're not new concepts. We've had the idea of virtual reality, augmented reality, gaming environments for a very long time in our society. But now we're integrating crypto ecosystems, crypto economics, tokens, into that environment. And I think we're creating this really amplified way of mitigating and mediating our reality. So to me, it's the cultural implications, I think, that are so exciting, and the fact that we're seeing some of these trends really come into fruition, come into their maturity.
Thanks for that, Sheila. Now, Nischal, I would hazard a guess and say some regulation is something that you hope 2022 will bring across. But along with that, what else is something that's something that you're looking forward to?
I think regulation is something the crypto community has been hoping for every year, and I think it'll continue to be the same this year. The good thing is that each year, I think we get closer to positive regulation, and that's a good thing. And I think it's for good reason. When you look back now, for good reason, thank God that regulations did not, like governments around the world did not, take to regulations in haste, because the industry is so rapidly evolving. And I think if you had gotten in any tight regulations a few years ago, it would have been obsolete by now. So it's good, I think, what's happening with regulation. Apart from that, what I see happening is one is your institutional players. I think they're getting deeper into crypto, and they're getting more serious about crypto. That's a growing trend, and that's great. The other is the talk of the town, which is CBDC. Some people in crypto love it, some people hate it. And the crypto community is divided whether CBDC is good for the ecosystem or not. I personally believe it's great because it grows the adoption, the understanding of this technology. Whether governments build crypto or the public builds it, I think ultimately the whole technology gets into the hands of more people. So I think CBDC it's going to be a big push this year, I believe, because we are seeing a lot of governments being very positive. China is really way ahead. US is talking about it. I just recently read news that a bunch of banks in the US are getting together to create their own like a stable coin. So that's going to be amazing. A lot of the buzzwords of 2021, I think NFTs, we saw work being done, but in Web3 metaverse, I think they've been more marketing than product development. And I think in this year, I hope to see product development happening, where it's not just a buzzword, but people are actually using some of the products in the metaverse. So yeah, I think overall these are some of the key highlights I would love to see in 2022.
Let's just stay with that for a moment more, Nischal. You were talking about more products in development. What are some of the cases that are currently in the sidelines, which you expect will become bigger when we're looking at blockchain-enabled technologies?
I think, look, play to earn is something that I think while in 2021 we heard about Axie Infinity and a few other things. I think it's just the tip of the iceberg that we're seeing, because globally there are, I think, over 1 billion people who are playing games online, and it's a huge market. And most of these players, they're just playing it for leisure. Now, if you were to ask someone who's playing it for leisure whether they would also want to make some money on the side while they play their favorite game, it's a no-brainer. Everyone's going to say yes. So the key point is, can these games now try to incorporate the whole blockchain side of it and bring in economies within their gaming ecosystems? And I think that's going to happen. Recently in India, there are quite a few. I just tweeted about the Hike team, which is building its own gaming ecosystem on the blockchain, and they've got millions of people already playing their game in Web 2. So everyone's trying to make that transition, and I think gaming world is going to be that big transition phase this year. So I'm betting big on games transitioning to Web 3.
Sheila, how much is gaming of priority to you? Is that something you focus on?
Ashwin, that's exactly what I think I was trying to say in my opening remarks, right? I think that there's a tendency, I think, to put crypto into this bubble and act as if it's not happening in the context of broader societal change. And I think we have to recognize that play to earn. I completely agree with what Nischal said. I think as that gets more traction, as people really grow to understand beyond even Axie and what's happening in the Philippines and what's traditionally kind of a very mobile workforce, right? That kind of was leaving the country to go send remittances home, all that kind of thing, that now can kind of stay within the borders of the Philippines and create even more value for their families, for themselves, et cetera, by playing games. I think as that concept becomes more rooted in the context that people are now leaving, great resignation, right? People are just more mobile, leaving jobs like crazy. People don't want to commute into the office anymore for a large part. Some people don't have to do that anymore. You could actually think about using your gaming, your leisure activity, as something that could then provide for your family and provide your livelihood. I think that is a powerful potential transformation that has to be contextualized within COVID-19, this pandemic, the changes, the restrictions on mobility and travel that we've seen coming up from here to there. All of those things, I think, are where crypto is going to play a much bigger role. And it's not going to be this thing, I think, that's relegated to just the financial services industry and seen as kind of a new way of investing or whatnot, which is, I think, how the broad mainstream population still sees it. Or worst case, that it's something that's used by criminals for nefarious activity, which I think is a very, very dated view. We'd all agree, but nevertheless is a view held by some portion of the population. You're going to see this as a tool for economic empowerment in a variety of different ways, not just because you bought a dog coin and suddenly it made a lot of money, right? You're going to see different crypto economic systems come into play that can actually provide you with real-time cash flow, right? That can actually help you pay for food, utilities, et cetera. And to Nishal's earlier point, as you see stable coins serving as an intermediary potentially between pure crypto, let's call it, and CBDCs, and you see more CBDCs coming into play, although I would argue we're still going to continue to see that more at a wholesale level used by banks than at a retail level used by consumers. Nevertheless, you're going to have these different ways of engaging with digital currency, with digital money, and with this exchange of value that I think are going to be transformative in our society, quite frankly. So we're ready for it as a world population. We're ready for touchless payment. Like all these kinds of things are very, very ordinary and normal in many, many parts of the world. Now, changing that back end so that it relies on a blockchain and it has a digital currency underlying it is really not that much of a psychological or user shift. It's more of a financial system shift. And as the regulation that you were talking about earlier does become more refined, or at least there's more stability in the regulatory environment, you're going to see more and more building that's going to, I think, push on some of these broader societal trends.
I want to stay on with regulation for a moment longer, but just before that, we were talking about, the societal impact of, of the COVID, the pandemic, and people going towards play to win. Do you think play to win would have got as much as an impetus if it weren't for the lockdowns, or it would have happened at a much later period of time?
I think it would have happened more slowly. I think eventually it would definitely have picked up. But part of the problem was that in countries that really exported a lot of their labor force to other countries, whether the Philippines is a great example of this, that wasn't really happening because of COVID lockdown restrictions, because of the concern people had they wouldn't be able to get back to see their families, they'd get stuck in some other country, because of immigration restrictions that were partially COVID related, but in other cases, for other reasons. For a lot of these reasons, I think that play to earn became something that got more attention earlier in some countries than it would have. But I personally think this was sort of inevitable. I think as you have a generation that's more familiar, that's digitally fluent, digitally native, I always say I'm raising crypto native kids, right? Who have a different understanding of the internet and how it works, but certainly enter in the workforce now, I'd say we have more digitally native people than we have people who are retiring out of it who are not digitally native. Play to earn is a very obvious kind of thing. Like you're gaming anyway, or you're on your phone or whatever it is anyway. When you realize you can make real money that you can actually use, like in real time, I think that's a very powerful thing. And I think it would have taken off regardless.
Well, thank you for that. That's a fascinating insight. I want to come back to regulation. We've seen, talk of regulation in the country every time there's a budget, parliamentary session. Every time there's a parliamentary session, we often hope that there's going to be some kind of a bill that will be tabled, but it's been pushed off. Crypto regulation, can it happen in isolated pools in countries, or do you think there's a need for far greater global cooperation to be able to bring out the kind of regulation that would hold stead, that is in pace with technology?
I mean, this is the $1 billion, possibly $1 trillion question, right? Now, my strong preference is we are talking about a borderless concept of borderless technology. And so ideally, you'd have a lot of coordination by different regulatory authorities. But let's be real, you can't even get alignment within a country that has multiple regulatory agencies. I take the United States as a classic example of this. There isn't even agreement within the United States agencies as to which agency regulates what around digital assets. I mean, it's just truly complicated. Some countries, I think, where you have a more unified monetary authority, Singapore, for example, is a little easier. But even then, I think that jurisdictions are playing kind of roulette with this. And I think they're really looking to see, what's other jurisdiction going to do? And can I create some kind of advantage? I think there's a recognition. I would say, I think at this point, there's a widespread recognition that this is going to be a massive industry that's going to bring economic opportunity to whatever country gets regulation, quote unquote, right. So I do think there's an understanding of that. Now, whether you're going to go like the way of China and say, we're going to go in a different direction and create a different economy and different opportunities around this particular concept of digital currencies that we are going to sanction and everything else we're not going to. So we're kind of going big on one thing, or whether you're more like the United States, where at least at present, there's this desire to kind of encourage competition, to kind of see what happens in different kinds of spaces. Regardless, I think there's going to be an opportunity for a lot of countries, and India is chief among them, to jump in there with regulation that maybe is responsive to another jurisdiction's getting it wrong. So that's one thing I think that we're not talking about enough, is this kind of competition among countries to see who's going to be the locus of a lot of this economic activity and how is it going to benefit their citizens, whether it's in a tax base, whether it's in spurring innovation, whatever it might be. So that's something I think is happening quietly. But again, I think the right thing is to have more global coordination. It's just that's very, very challenging in an environment where there's so much innovation. Nobody who's in those policymaker positions truly deeply understands the technology, let alone the trajectory of the technology and its potential. So these are ongoing challenges that we have to kind of reckon with as a crypto ecosystem.
Who's enabling these intergovernmental conversations? Is there work that's happening there?
Yeah, well, I think there are some groups that are global, right? So FATF is definitely a global body, and they they basically administer the KFC, not administer, they set the rules around know your customer, anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism funding, that a lot of jurisdictions around the world participate in and adhere to. And those that don't are pretty quiet about the fact that they don't, right? The forum is certainly trying to have conversations. We have conversations where we bring together different jurisdictions, ministers and level regulators, others, to learn from each other. We did that with central banks early on, and we're seeing a lot more willingness to share on the part of central banks, in part because of the work I would say that we did bringing together a lot of these folks in 2018 to 2019 to have conversations about the technology and its potential. For the most part, this is part of the issue, right? There isn't really a global convening body of these regulators. So a lot of these conversations, frankly, happen in Davos. They happen in these kinds of places where people get together. I think there are natural allies for some of these things. The EU and US, are obviously very close allies and coordinate and talk about a lot of things. But again, there's different cultural values reflected in how you view crypto. Do you see it as a threat? Do you see it as an opportunity? Do you see it as a tool of empowerment and liberty? All these different things. I think your political philosophy almost is really key, because I think you look at China, clearly it's a threat. You look at the EU, something to be regulated as inevitable in a way. You look at the US, it really depends, depending on which side of the aisle, right? If you're a very freedom, rights-loving kind of person, you look at the empowerment possibilities very differently than if you're more of a progressive person who believes in big government. So a lot of this is getting caught up in politics, in natural countries that are naturally allies or not. And I think the political economy around this is something we can't ignore. But to your question, there aren't a lot of places where that's happening, and the forum is one of them. So we're privileged to be in that position.
Thanks for that, Sheila. And I know regulation is something that is always a hot topic in India. Nischal, we spoke about this a long time back, and I want to know if your points of view have changed. If regulations were to come about, if the bill is tabled in the parliament, what are the first couple of things that you hope will be, pushed through, even in a rudimentary form that can be fine-tuned over a period of time?
I think, at least for India, while regulations is something we're all talking about, and there was a bill in the parliament at least listed. I think what would be faster is probably a set of guidelines for crypto-related businesses to run, because right now we're at that stage zero. There's nothing, and we are hoping for directly going to 100%, which is regulation. But I think there can be a middle path, which is the government or the right regulator. Now there's confusion which regulator, but I think the government could probably just release some simple, straightforward guidelines that would ensure that we can keep the bad actors away from taking advantage of the fact that it's an unregulated market, but it's definitely a financial sector, and there have been so many scams that you keep hearing about, and I think it's important for every government to come up with some guidelines that will help, and guidelines as simple as starting with KYCs, starting with ensuring that you follow AML laws, and working closely with the law enforcement in the country that you operate. Because one of the things that we've been seeing in India is whenever law enforcement has to reach out to crypto businesses that are serving Indian customers but not registered in India, it's always it's a big hassle for them. Most times they don't hear back, and their investigation comes to a halt. So I think these are the things that we don't have to wait for a complete regulation to come in. We can effect change by just bringing some regulations that exist in the traditional financial sector, and just put them on crypto businesses. So I believe that's the direction India is trying to go to as well, while working on the bill simultaneously. But the bill is pretty complicated because just 2 years ago we saw a draft bill which was pretty negative, but the thing is, then NFTs happened, and there's no mention about what happens to non-fungible, because the whole concept was all around currency and fungibility and what happens to an NFT now. And I think the bill is going to go through those cycles of constant change as new technologies emerge, because you never know, something new might come up this year, and you might not have taken that into consideration. So I think guidelines just help in that way, where an ever-evolving industry can just adapt to some of the existing laws and wait for innovation to take its course, and then you can come up with more hardened industry specific regulation. Look at the internet. We've done something similar. If you are an e-commerce company, then some of the local e-commerce laws apply on you, but the entire internet is not yet regulated. And I think that's a better approach to look at crypto, at least for India.
And balancing innovation and regulation is an unenviable problem because the goalposts keep changing as fast as innovation themselves. And talking about innovation, DeFi, that's the one thing that was pretty much in our reading list over the last couple of months. Sheila, it's growing big. Where do you see it coming in the coming year? And how soon do you think DeFi is something that can become an every man, every person consumer product the way cryptocurrencies are today?
A lot of questions in there. I think that a lot of what's interesting about DeFi, I think, are some of the industry sectors that it hasn't really blown up in yet. Insurance is the one I talk about a lot. I just think that the idea that you could offer insurance and kind of think about that through a DeFi lens is really interesting and powerful. Credit is also talked about a lot. Those are, in many countries, very highly regulated industries. Like insurance and lending are just very highly regulated. And so I think what's going to be interesting is to see how DeFi intersects with existing regulation and where it's seen as being, again, this new tool, which is, it's actually quite profoundly different in terms of what the offerings could be. And again, the economic empowerment opportunity it could provide. But I do worry that DeFi, for some reason, I think is cast with this really broad brush as being, I don't want to say dangerous is not the right word, but it's just being kind of, scary in a way, like a little frightening, I think, to a lot of regulators. I think the idea that some of these, again, highly regulated industries that function in a pretty linear, like there's not that much creativity in the insurance industry, no offense to anybody who's in the insurance industry, there's not that much creativity. And so the idea that you'd suddenly create a really brand new creative model, unlike payments, where we've seen so much innovation in the payment space and just fintech over many years. So the idea of new innovation in payments is not that shocking to anyone. Insurance, credit, it's a little different. So my hope is that DeFi will continue to get more and more traction. I do think it's going to run into a brick wall of regulation faster than I think cryptocurrencies did or have. I think there's a little more openness to having those conversations. And a lot of the kind of, arguments you get against crypto at this point, I'd say the sort of crypto that's more oriented towards exchange of value, are really from people who are just kind of deliberately creating a talking point, right? The energy burn or the criminal ransomware or whatever, this kind of business. In DeFi, I think there is scope to actually have complicated conversations about this stuff. So that's where I do think there's going to be a brick wall that it runs into, and there's going to be a bit of a pause while I think the big builders in this space figure out how do we accommodate some of this regulatory environment, and how do we kind of push for an understanding that innovation in these spaces is also critically important to people's economic agency, right? Because it's one thing if you can make payments using crypto or whatever, that's great. It's another thing if you can actually use crypto as collateral and you can use it as something that is going to provide you meaningful opportunity to buy real world items, whatever those might be. It's another thing if you can protect yourself and hedge against risk. That's huge. And the reality right now is that insurance is hard to come by in most parts of the world. There isn't even really a robust insurance market in many parts of the world or in many communities who are kind of grossly underinsured, right? Or just not not insured at all. It's not even a concept that makes sense to people. So that's a place I think that's one to watch. And again, it's really hard to predict because those regulators are used to a very linear kind of approach to regulation there, where change is very, very slow. And this is very sudden and it's very dramatic. So we'll see. We'll have to see how it plays out, but I'm hopeful.
Thanks for that, Sheila. Now, to wrap up our discussion out here, now, one of the more interesting things that happens if you're in the news side of cryptocurrencies is that almost everyone comes up to you and asks, what coin should I buy? How should I invest? And that is a bigger challenge for us than actually trying to interpret what's happening in the world of cryptocurrencies. Just want to wrap up our discussion with both of you helping me understand and helping our viewers understand. What is an advice that you would give for a first-time crypto investor who's fascinated by the space, who hopes to do well out there? What is something that you tell people when they were to come to you and ask you, what should I do? Nischal?
Look, I think, I don't want to suggest, what tokens you should buy. But what we've seen is Bitcoin is, what most of the people entering crypto, at least our data shows that that's the coin that people buy. Having said that, I think what's happening now is people are taking this category driven approach towards investment, because now people are beginning to understand that crypto, the whole ecosystem, has a variety of categories. Like, for example, a layer one where there are quite a few smart contract platforms being built, and you can take a bet on the layer one solutions out there and choose a couple of them. Then comes, if you believe that the way to scale layer one is a layer two solution, and maybe there are a few chains over there. And then the whole the Web3 universe that is opening up. So and then DeFi, there are quite a few protocols. And if you believe that a world of decentralized finance is the future, then there are quite a few protocols for lending and the other activities that are part of DeFi, where you can bet and buy some of the tokens of that. So I think this categorization of the whole crypto ecosystem into a few large categories and then picking the winners that you believe are doing the right work, I think that's a very sorted investment approach, and that I'm seeing a lot of people do now.
And a more mature approach as well. Sheila, what is your advice to first-time crypto investors?
Sure. So I'll echo what Nischal said. I mean, certainly Bitcoin is the gateway drug, if you will, to a lot of this ecosystem. And what I'll say is, it's always buyer beware. Please don't rely on what you see on social media. That is not reliable. You have to do your own research always. But I'll also say that if you're already you already have a diversified portfolio. So you hold a variety of different kinds of assets or whatever it might be in your financial portfolio. I do think crypto is a very worthwhile investment. And so if you don't do that, I wouldn't say if you've gone from like zero savings to putting everything in crypto, it makes any sense. It's very dangerous to do, because you should recognize that what you put in, you could lose. So be aware of that. It's hard to time the market unless you're paying extremely close attention, like on a hourly by hourly basis. So some of these things have kind of proven over time to hold value. Bitcoin is one. There are others as well. That's the one that's just kind of the best known. And if you look at the long-term trends and think about when would you want to exit, are you holding this for kind of a short-term flip? Are you looking for long-term, longer-term investment? All these decisions are very personal decisions. But I do think at this point in the evolution of crypto that if you are already diversified, if you already have a portfolio of more traditional holdings, it is a reasonable thing. It's a very reasonable thing to do, to put some part of your investment or savings into crypto, especially if you're able to kind of time the market and you don't need that money doesn't have to be super liquid for you. So these are all considerations. Buyer beware as always. Do your own research. Don't trust anything you read on social media, because it moves so fast in this world that anything that looks like it's a really good short-term win to flip is going to be done by the time you get to it. I can almost guarantee, if you have any sort of day job or you have children or any other responsibilities outside of your life, outside of sitting on Twitter and like looking for that opportunity is going to probably be gone by the time you get to it. So just keep that in mind. And, but it's also where it's just like, get a wallet, just play around with it. It's not that hard. It's not that complicated. The user interface has gotten so much better over the past few years. So get yourself comfortable with that and just see what it's all about, because it's something that can also it's a community, right? And there's something exciting about that as well. So that's what I have to say about that.
The tenets of financial prudence don't change. And I think you've pretty much encapsulated the whole thing. This was the same thing that we heard when it came to equities 20 years back, and it's pretty much those same tenets as well. On that note, Sheila and Nischal, it's been a delight to have you join us here on Business Insider India. It's a lovely conversation to understand how you are thinking about this space and what we should be looking forward to in 2022. I look forward to checking in with both of you through the middle of the year and the end of the year to see how you are rating this year when it comes to the world of blockchain technologies and cryptocurrencies. On that note, thank you so much for joining us again. Have a great year ahead and take care.